What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the State of the Program series on the Crossover U College Hoops Talk podcast. My name is Kanaye, and I'm joined with Josh. And today we're going to be talking about the Louisville Cardinals. Really solid first year for Pat Kelsey taking over that program. We're able to make the NCAA tournament before losing to Creighton in the first round. They did lose some guys, which we're going to touch on, but they also did a lot in the transfer portal, bringing in some really talented guys as well in the freshman class. And we're going to talk about those things, how they stack up in both the ACC and nationally, how we feel about Pat Kelsey, and just the overall vibes in Louisville going to next season. But before we get into that, if you like this podcast or anything else you see on this channel, please engage with our videos in any way you can. We would subscribe to our channel, liking our videos, or just telling other people about it. It really does help with putting our videos out to a larger group of people. So let's get it started with what Louisville has lost. I think losing your two leading scorers from this past year definitely hurts a lot. Those guys being Terrence Edwards Jr., who transferred from JMU after a really solid season the year prior. Averaged around nearly 17 points per game this past year. Chucky Hepburn right behind at 16.4. Really solid year from those guys. You're also losing Rain Smith, James Scott, Waterman, Traore. Guys who, maybe were in smaller roles, but definitely contributed at points of the year. But I definitely think it hurts a lot losing both Terrence Edwards and Chucky Hepburn. I believe both those guys were out of eligibility, though, so not all too much you could have done.
Yeah, I will say actually it's the top three guys. Rain Smith averaged 13 a game. And when you put all together, this is nearly 3/4 of all points per game that were scored.
Right.
It is kind of a bit of a loss. Once again, when you're rebuilding a program from the bottom up, you're going to have a lot of experienced guys that leave immediately. That's pretty similar with Kentucky, actually. I kind of think this is kind of bigger than we might say. Best season. Edwards has had his best seasons. This is a lot of talent that you can't get back, really. It wasn't going to come back. And I'm glad they didn't really lose anybody crazy to the portal at all. But at the same time, it's a pretty big loss for a new program. I kind of want to give this a 6 in the loss category.
Yeah, I'm not against that. Losing what nearly was almost close to 45 points a night that you're losing between those three guys. It's really tough to have to go ahead and replace that. But they did do a fairly good job in that. But I'm not against having them at a 6, just considering you're losing your top 3 scores from this past season.
Definitely.
We get into ads. This is where Louisville really is one of the stars of this college basketball offseason. In the transfer portal, they were able to land Ryan Conwell, Adrian Woolley, and Isaac McNeely. Ryan Conwell played at that really, really good Indiana State team with Robbie Vila several years back. Played this past year at Xavier where he averaged 6.5 points per game. Is one of the best shooters and tough shot makers in the sport going to next season. Adrian Woolley was nearly at 19 points per game at Kennesaw State this past year. Won Player of the Year in that conference. Isaac McNeely, close to 14.5 points a game at Virginia. Considering he played for Tony Bennett, he's going to bring defense. He's going to bring shooting. And on top of that, they have a really solid incoming freshman class, highlighted by Mikel Brown Jr., who is a 5-star, is the 8th best player in the top ESPN Top 100. They also bring in Sananda Fru from overseas, along with Mohamed Kamara and Vangelis Zugris. If I pronounce any of those names wrong, I do apologize if any of those guys are watching. But again, the incoming freshman, especially Mikel Brown, who's absolutely lit it up in the U19 World Cup this summer, they're all really talented. I think Mikel's going to be awesome.
Definitely. I mean, there is so much love about this incoming group of Louisville guys. It is probably the best incoming class in almost a decade in Louisville's history. First off, Mikel Brown, I think he was considered the number 8 prospect in the ESPN 100. I kind of put him over guys like Boozer right now. He has shown so well in his recent gameplay that he can be the number 1 option on this team. And I'm kind of all for back a good amount of the lineup. The portal was one of the best in the country, and I like the deepness of where they can go. Give me an 8. I think an 8's fair.
Yeah, no, I think an 8's very fair too. Just considering you have one of the best transfer portal classes in the country, you're bringing in a guy like a freshman like Mikel Brown Jr. You're also retaining your front court between Javon Hadley and Casey Pryor, who, like you mentioned, Pryor did deal with the injury this past season, only played in 7 games. But when you look at the depth head to toe, having a guy like Adrian Woolley probably being your sixth man, I think just speaks to how much depth you have. A guy who averaged 19 at his former destination, being your first man off the bench, I think is just such a blessing. And I think an 8 would be a really fair score to give him.
Easily.
Now, before we talk about how we feel regarding Pat Kelsey, I think it is important to throw out who we think is going to be the starters for Louisville this year. I personally have Mikal Brown Jr., Isaac McNeely, Ryan Conwell, Javon Hadley, and Casey Pryor rounding it out to 5. Really solid lineup in my opinion. Josh, I believe, doesn't very far off from it.
I honestly have, I think, the exact same roster. I really like, once again, deep this can be. Woolley could really start if given the chance. He is 6'5", so maybe the height thing kind of gets him. But he performed well against Rutgers, the one high major program he did face. I think there's opportunities for guys like Frew and Kamara to work their way into the lineup. But overall, I like the one that has been built so far. And I think it's going to be a very consistent starting 5. Like, this is not one that I feel could be altered too much unless everything goes wrong, and I kind of doubt that.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, I think these guys are really going to show up every night. Again, you mentioned this is going to be a consistent starting lineup. It's a starting lineup that's pretty much built on consistent players. Conwell never really had too many ups and downs past year at Xavier. Same deal with Isaac McNeely. Of course, we got to see Mikal Brown in action before we get a true idea of how good he is as a college player. But Javon Hadley, Casey Pryor, those guys, I think, they don't have too crazy of a ceiling, but their floor is quite high in the college atmosphere. And overall, I think the starting lineup is going to be really, really good. I'm super excited to see him play against Kentucky. Before we get into talking about some of that, how do you feel about Pat Kelsey?
I like Pat Kelsey. You want to talk about all the new coaches, and like last year, big talk was Young, Hope, and him being like the new wave of great coaches. Honestly, I kind of put him third of those top 3, but he's great. There is so much love about how he transformed Charleston and then immediately went to transforming this Louisville team. And let's be honest, Louisville has had so much worse in recent years. They haven't had anything like this. This is the breath of fresh air that everyone was hoping for. There were doubters. The doubters were wrong, thank goodness. And honestly, he's a top 3 to 5 coach in the ACC right now.
Most definitely. I mean, just the job he's done in 1 year, like you talked about, of really bringing back this Louisville program, giving the fans a lot of hope for what's to come in the near future. I mean, you look back to the start of the season where he's walking around campus trying to fire up the students on campus to get them to go to the KFC Yum Center or go watch a basketball game. And, at the time, you might have laughed at it. I personally thought maybe it was a little corny seeing it in the moment, but you look at the job he's done and how much energy he's brought to his roster, the rest of his coaching staff, the school, just the entire program. It's amazing to see what can happen in just one season. And Louisville's fan base is completely backing him. I am as well. I'm a big Pat Kelsey fan, and I'm really excited to see him hopefully try to take the next step as a coach and make it into the second weekend with a roster that definitely looks like it's built to do so.
Easily. And this is a team that, in my opinion, has a national championship ceiling. I know it's a little weird to say that, the number 9, considering if you look at our previous teams in Duke, we didn't have that. But this team is super deep, very strong, and I get the coaching thing can outweigh it. I think first and second year coaches haven't won in quite some time or ever. But if you look at the other way around, the past 3 champions, besides UConn 2 years ago, lost in the first round. That is Louisville.
Yep.
In terms of coaching in general, I kind of want a 7. Once again, he's new to this. He's not like insanely good. We have to see how this year is. I think this is really a good test year, but he's definitely miles better than anything we've seen since the Patina days.
Most definitely. And I definitely think the Louisville fan base backs him a lot. I do think we need to see a little bit more out of Pat Kelsey before he kind of enters that next tier of college coaches. But from what we've seen out of him at Louisville so far, he's done a really admirable job. Definitely has another step to take, but I think a 7 would be a fair score to give Pat Kelsey going into this next year. Now, to get into conference, I personally think Duke opens up as the preseason favorite to win the ACC, but I definitely would pick Louisville to be the team that ends up winning the conference and potentially the tournament by the end of the season. Now, I will say the ACC, while it will be better this year than it was this past year, where the ACC was, if we're being completely honest, kind of a joke to the ACC's normal standard, I do still think there's very little games in the ACC scheduling that are going to make good resume building wins to help boost your how your team's resume is looking going into the NCAA tournament. So for conference, for reference, we gave Duke a 7. Considering that Louisville, I think, would open up as a second or third preseason favorite if you're betting going into the year, I'd probably have Louisville just at a 7 as well.
I think a 7 is pretty much accurate. Once again, not a crazy ACC. It's going to be so much better than last year. Thank goodness. I actually can't wait to watch the ACC for the first time in 2 years. And Louisville's going to be a team I'm watching the most. I'm going to be honest. I'm really excited to see how they stack up against Duke, NC State, Clemson, UNC. They can go toe-to-toe with pretty much any of those teams, and most of those teams will be tournament teams. So this is really good prep for the NCAA. I think conference, once again, is probably the best. So 7 is respectable, but I think it's definitely a good place for Louisville.
Most definitely. And to get into the vibes in Louisville going into the next season, I think vibes are really, really high. You just had your first good season in a really long time in Pat Kelsey's first year. Put together a roster that looks like it's built to be able to make a Final Four and potentially win a national championship. Josh mentioned a lot of former champions have lost in the first round the year prior and turn around and go win it the next year. Louisville can definitely do so. And again, I just think that, like I've mentioned several times in this video, I think the entire fan base is really backing Pat Kelsey and what he's building in Louisville. And I think vibes are pretty high. I would honestly put it at an 8.
I actually grew full-heartedly with that one. 8 was what I was thinking too. And keep in mind this, 2 years ago, they won like 4 games.
Right.
They were the laughing stock. It made me think Louisville would never come back. And then everything changes like this. I feel like you got to pack the KFC Yum Center when they play Kentucky later on this year. You got to be ready to play Duke. You got to be ready to play NC State. Like, this feels like a team that so many people are going to be watching. This is one of the highlight teams that people will be looking at all throughout the season. That's going to be me, Kanaye. If the vibes are high for us, I can only imagine the vibes in Louisville right now.
Most definitely. I know you mentioned Kentucky. I'm curious to ask, who do you have in their matchup going to this year?
For reference, they're only playing one, unfortunately. It will be in the KFC Yum Center this time around. I kind of lean Louisville. I feel like, once again, the early season things can kind of lean Kentucky. The team is not as put together, so I can see where like Kentucky can win that game. But if I'm right, and the KFC Yum Center is packed in a way that we haven't seen it in a long time, I think I could see Louisville sneaking at an upset win and putting them on the board for, honestly, the rest of the season. A huge win against a non-conference team like Kentucky is big.
Yeah, I honestly would lean towards Louisville too. I think being able to play at home in front of a crowd that might catch Kentucky off guard, just considering that rivalry's been largely one-sided over the last almost decade at this point. But now Louisville's kind of starting to even things out, and they are, honestly, I think Kentucky's roster is more talented, but I feel like Louisville's pieces almost fit together a little bit more in a way that makes sense as opposed to what Kentucky has. But I would definitely lean towards Louisville in this matchup once next year. But of course, I think it should be a really, really good game nonetheless. Now, I think that pretty much takes care of everything we have today for the Louisville Cardinals and the state of their program going to the 25 season. As always, it really does go a long way if you guys can engage with our videos in any way you can. And until the next episode, we'll see you all next time.